Have you ever looked up into the night sky, maybe just after sunset, and seen it? A really bright, steady light cruising silently overhead. Well, that's no star. That is the International Space Station. A truly monumental achievement of human engineering, and for more than 2 decades, our constant home in orbit.
So let's just start with a number that kind of sets the stage for this whole thing. $150 billion. That's billion with a B. That is the estimated cost of the ISS, which makes it, by far, the most expensive single item humanity has ever built. It's a pretty staggering figure, right? But it also tells you just how ambitious this whole project really is.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at what this city in the sky actually is. Then, we'll dive into the wild story of how it was built by former enemies. After that, we'll explore why it even exists, its purpose as a lab. We'll also get into what it's like to live there, and finally, we'll tackle the big question. What does the future hold? Okay, let's start with the basics. What exactly is that thing circling over our heads? From down here on Earth, it's just a dot of light, but the actual scale of it is, well, it's pretty hard to wrap your head around. Just look at these numbers for a second. We're talking about a structure that weighs nearly 1,000,000 pounds. It's about 109 meters long, which is basically the length of an entire American football field, including the end zones. And its speed, it's just mind-boggling. It's whipping around the Earth at 27,600 kilometers per hour. That is so fast that it completes 15 and a half orbits every single day. For the crew on board, that means they get to see a sunrise and a sunset about every 45 minutes. Wild. So, we know what it is, but the story of how it even got there is, frankly, just as remarkable as the engineering itself. See, this wasn't built by one country. It was assembled, piece by painstaking piece, through an international collaboration that was, at the time, almost unthinkable. To get it, you really have to go back to the 80s, the tail end of the Cold War. The US was planning its own station called Freedom to compete with the Soviet Mir station. But by the early 90s, the Soviet Union was gone, budgets were shrinking everywhere, and both projects were pretty much dead in the water. They were just too expensive. And then, in 1993, something incredible happened. These two former rivals stunned the world and decided to team up. And just 5 years later, in 1998, the first Russian-built module, Zarya, launched, and the construction of the ISS officially began. And this right here really shows you the fundamental shift. The space race was all about political rivalry, national pride, beating the other guy. The ISS program, which eventually involved 15 different countries, was the complete opposite. It was about shared scientific goals, sharing the enormous costs, and frankly, about diplomacy. So yeah, the station is a triumph of engineering, for sure, but its very existence is a triumph of international relations. So we know how it was built, which is an amazing story, but let's get to the why. Why spend all that money and all that political capital? Well, the answer, in one word, is science. The ISS is one of the most unique, most valuable laboratories ever created. See, in that microgravity environment, that feeling of weightlessness, scientists can do experiments that are literally impossible to do down here on Earth. They're using a giant detector called the alpha magnetic spectrometer to hunt for things like dark matter. They're studying what long-term spaceflight does to the human body, which is absolutely crucial if we ever want to go to Mars. They're researching new materials, observing our planet's climate with incredible clarity, and even testing some really wild theories, like seeing if bacteria can actually survive for years in the vacuum of space. And just to put the importance of the science into perspective, don't just take my word for it. NASA has actually said that the alpha magnetic spectrometer, that dark matter hunter we just mentioned, is as important as the Hubble Space Telescope. That gives you a sense of the kind of fundamental, universe-changing questions that are being asked 250 miles above our heads. Okay, but beyond the big science and the geopolitics, the ISS is also a home. So what is it actually like for the handful of people living and working up there day in and day out? Well, life in orbit is basically a constant battle against your own body. Without Earth's gravity pulling you down, your muscles start to waste away and your bones lose density. To fight this, every single astronaut has to go through a strict 2-hour exercise routine every single day. And that's just the physical part. Then you have the psychological strain of being cooped up in a tin canner with a small international crew for 6 months straight. And to understand just how intense that pressure can get, listen to this. This is a quote from cosmonaut Valery Rumin from his journal during a long mission on a previous space station. It's a brutally honest and pretty stark look at the psychological challenge of just being up there for so long. And yet, it's not all strain and struggle. Amidst all those challenges, a really unique human culture has started to bloom up there. I'm sure many of you remember this. In 2013, Canadian Commander Chris Hadfield recorded the first ever music video in space, a beautiful, moving cover of David Bowie's Space Oddity. It was this incredible moment that connected millions of us on the ground with the pure humanity and wonder of living in orbit. But for all of its amazing achievements, the station's future isn't guaranteed. It faces some pretty serious threats, both from the environment around it and, well, from the politics right back here on Earth. One of the biggest, most constant threats is space junk. There are literally hundreds of thousands of pieces of old satellites and rocket parts zipping around up there. And even a tiny fleck of paint when it's moving at 17,000 miles per hour can be absolutely catastrophic. So, to stay safe, the station has to perform what are called debris avoidance maneuvers, or DAMs for short. They literally have to fire their thrusters to dodge out of the way of incoming junk. And this isn't some rare thing. As you can see from this chart, the danger is actually growing. By 2009, the station had done about 10 of these maneuvers. By late 2021, that number had almost tripled to 29. The space around our planet is getting more and more crowded and more dangerous. And sometimes tensions on Earth have a way of reaching all the way into orbit. Following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the head of Russia's space agency threatened to pull out of the partnership and even made some pretty alarming suggestions that Russia could cause the station to deorbit out of control. Now, in response, NASA has made it clear that it's working with commercial partners who could provide the ability to keep the station in orbit, ensuring it stays safe even if one of the major partners leaves the program. The thing is, the International Space Station has a limited lifespan. The current plan is for it to be safely and intentionally brought down out of orbit, crashing into the Pacific Ocean sometime around the year 2030. For over 2 decades, it has been this incredible symbol of scientific discovery and post-Cold War cooperation. Its end will close a huge chapter in human exploration, which leaves all of us with a really critical question. In a world that feels like it's full of renewed competition, what will our next great collaborative project be?